Workplace Champions is made possible by Workday. Welcome to Workplace Champions. This episode will be featuring the workforce insights and commentary of three finance leaders, including CFO Anat Askenazi of Eli Lilly, CFO Evan Goldstein of Seismic, and CFO Ambereen Toubassy of Airtable. One more time. And once more, we're pleased to feature performance management guru Brett Knowles as our resident thought leader as we together seek to highlight the takeaways from our distinguished group of workplace champions. Brett Knowles joins us after this. In a world that's always changing, one thing never does. Your need to adapt, your need to evolve, your need to grow. That's why we built Workday, a single finance, HR, and planning system that can change as your needs change and evolve as the world evolves. To learn how Workday is helping mid-size organizations embrace the future with confidence, visit us at workday.com. Hi, it's Jack Sweeney, and I'm here with Brett Knowles. Brett, I don't think you're in Toronto today. Where are you exactly?
Well, today Boston, tomorrow down to sunny Florida. If I do it quickly, I can get down there in time to sacrifice a turkey along with the rest of your country folk.
Yes, well, we do that here. That's an inclusive holiday. We're happy to have you join us. You're also have a race coming up, a turkey trot. How long is a turkey trot, by the way?
Yeah, they come in different lengths. The one I'm doing is a 5K. If I'm lucky, I can make it through without having a heart attack. If you find that no one responds to your emails for next month's podcast, you'll know that God decided my time was up.
Well, speaking of God, or those who perhaps may have a God complex, Elon Musk has been grabbing some headlines. And since the developments at Twitter really do intersect so much of what we've been talking about on this podcast, whether it's just talent, the virtual workforce, compensation, hiring, quiet quitting, not so quiet quitting, I thought I would read the first few graphs of the one of the news reports last week. This is from the New York Times, but a lot of the business publications were covering it rather closely. Would that be a good way to kick things off, do you think, Brett? What do you say?
Absolutely.
So, Mr. Musk, Elon Musk, last week told workers at Twitter they would need to answer through an online form by late Thursday, November 16th, whether they plan to stay or leave. By the deadline, 5 p.m. on the 16th, hundreds of Twitter employees appear to have decided to depart. With 3 months of severance, Twitter later announced via email that it would close our office buildings and disable employee badge access until Monday, which is when we're recording this. The exits added the turmoil at Twitter since Mr. Musk completed his $44 billion takeover last month. The billionaire has laid off half of Twitter's 7,500 full-time workers, fired dissenters, and told employees that they need to be extremely hardcore to make the company a success. But what are we to make of this approach that he's taken? Some would wager he's having a sort of a meltdown of some kind. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting because we don't know, right? So what we don't know, and maybe you do, I don't, I tried to research it, but what was the current culture and working feeling in Twitter? So was it already a big problem and he's just throwing water on a fire? Or was it fine and he's made fire, to create some sort of controversy? Do you have any reading on that, Jack? Do you know what it was like before?
there wasn't, again, the rap on Twitter was it hadn't innovated, where other social platforms had begun to introduce new functionality along the way. Twitter was slow to the game. Jack Dorsey, the former CEO, is running multiple companies, much the same Elon is. And I think there's something to be said. Leadership, when you kind of stretch it across multiple enterprises, grows a little thin. And I think some of the criticism that was waiting for Elon Musk when he arrived had been directed within the ranks there at Jack Dorsey in the past, who was sort of a part-time CEO. So there might have been that little underpinning, but certainly nothing like this.
I don't know. Where there's smoke, there's fire. So there might have been a lack of innovation, but why was there a lack of innovation? Was there a cultural thing that um, allowed them to think that they were beyond the need to do that? Or like, you just don't know. So I'm always concerned when I read articles like that are clearly um, providing one side of the story. I always wonder what the other side might be. So we could hypothesize here. Now, and your conjecture is interesting, but if you think of other people that have run very diverse organizations, so Jack Welch is, the idea of a thought leader, whether you agree with his dogma or not, he had a dogma that worked across multiple organizations, and no one said, "Gosh, you shouldn't." Or Lee Iacocca, or like there's even Steve Jobs, like very different businesses. So I understand how there's no universal truth, but just because he's running multiple businesses doesn't necessarily mean that we've lost a pixie dust. Just because Elon has got the cattle prod out about productivity, performance, attendance, attitude, doesn't mean it was a beautiful organization ahead of time and he's stirring things up. So I just wish we had a better balance on the news. So let's hypothesize. Let's imagine that it was a mess and he's cleaning it up. We'd all be going, awesome. Like, it's about time someone did that. We've all invested billions of dollars in Twitter and we're not getting our money back. Yay for him coming in and saving the day. That would be an interesting article. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe, the hard evidence we know is innovation stopped. Advertisers were getting a bit bored. Users were going somewhere else. So we don't know why that was. We don't know what the systemic issue is, but clearly the business model needs a jolt. Now we can debate, was that the right jolt to give it? Was there another way to move that complacency forward? Now I said in both scenarios, the place was a dumpster fire already, he's putting out the fire, or merely what we do know, and that is innovation was lagging, progress wasn't making. Both those scenarios, you go, well, not necessarily the strategy I would do, but it turns out I haven't made billions of dollars of valuation. Maybe my technique's not quite the right one.
Well, a lot of followers of Elon Musk are sort of saying what you just did, sort of shrugging and saying, well, he must know something. The approach he's taken and some of the smart ass comments he's made on Twitter along the way, you have to question whether it's been helpful, whether he continues to send mixed signals to this workforce that, is in wide disarray at this point in time. Again, I think he's behaved really badly. At the same time, the three finance leaders who we'll be hearing from today seem to have a more even-handed approach when it comes to talent and culture. And it was kind of refreshing to hear from these finance leaders who, again, are emphasizing, what was important to them on the way up was the people who they were working with. Whether we want to buy in on all of this, I think I think there's some truth to it.
I'm with you on that. None of us will know what was going on inside the organization, but there's a lot of evidence to indicate it wasn't a smooth, efficient running machine.
Yeah.
So I agree, there's a great segue in that article to today's conversations. But the thing we need to keep in mind is we don't know what was going on in Twitter. We also don't know what was going on in each and any of these organizations that we're hearing from. And obviously, when we hear from these people, there's a bias that comes out in what they're speaking about. So I think what we're about to learn and experience is invaluable, whether we know what happened and Elon was doing the right thing, or any of these managers knew what was happening and doing the right thing. It's a good segue to, as a leader, when you have a bunch of people going in a room, we often, I mean, no one's ever taken a course in how to run a meeting. Like, that doesn't exist. We assume if I plow 12 people in a room or however many, close the door, slide pizzas under it, great answers will come out. And that's not the case. And today's conversation is about how can we work the chemistry of the room to the best extent possible to better look for predictable outcomes. That's what the Elon story is about. And that's what the three people we've talked to today, I think, tell us about.
Well, you know what, Brett, I decided to once more, it occurred to me that Ambereen Toubassy of Airtable had some interesting comments that she made about evaluating people, how they collaborate together. And I completely overlooked it last time. And I knew you were the person I'd love to share this with. And just some thoughts on her as well. One of the interesting things she shared, and she had like 7 years at Goldman Sachs before joining hedge funds for another 12 years. And then she decided she wanted to start up her own hedge fund. And she went out there and started talking to potential investors. And along the way, she spoke to a few CFOs. And one of the things she said that struck her was that the CFOs began talking about their people and emphasizing the different functional heads that they were collaborating with and how they were managing their teams. And she realized there was a whole part of her career that in some ways she never got all the mentoring or became the mentor she hoped to. So as somebody who, as she liked to say, always be learning, she decided there was much more to learn in the CFO role, where in fact, it's very often about the people. So with that, I'll tee up the clip. This is Ambereen Toubassy, CFO of Airtable, making a return appearance on Workplace Champions.
We have a business analytics function, which works really closely with the data engineering team and the data science team that lives within product and development. And the business analytics team under finance just has a very financial oriented lens. And so they're really good partners with the broader data science and data engineering team. I also have a strategic operations team, and that is effectively, project managers and program managers who can make sure when we have cross-functional initiatives, they are very well managed and, step A leads to step B leads to step C, and we sort of get the business impact we're looking for. And then lastly, on the legal function, which I also oversee, we have, the four broad pillars you would expect. We have an employee legal function, we have a commercial contracts legal function, we have a technology and privacy legal function, and then we also have the corporate security, sort of fundraising, et cetera, legal function. Great thing is, I love meeting people who do things that are different than what I do because I learn from them, and I do get excited about the pure act of learning, I would say. The other thing that I have found to be really interesting is different frameworks of behavioral assessments. Not that we do behavioral assessments when we interview people and choose to bring them in, but we do behavioral assessments once people have joined our team. And so it is interesting, for example, we use this thing called Myers-Briggs, and I know on my team sort of, the population of introverts and extroverts. And that's why we know when we conduct a meeting or do an all hands or do an offsite, how do we structure activities that will work for the few extroverts. And in a finance and legal team, you have fewer of those than you do of the introverts, but will work for the predominance of introverts, and sort of how to make that happen. One of the other dimensions on that one is sort of strategic thinking versus in the details thinking. And again, I have the strategic finance team, which thinks very much in broad strokes. And then someone on an accounting team will be much more detailed, and just understanding those differences, not just by function, but by individuals, has been really helpful in terms of creating the team that when you bring it all together is sort of as efficient and as productive on behalf of Airtable as it can be.
I thought it was interesting on several counts. First off, this realization about the importance of people in organizations. And I admire her. It took me at least a decade to realize as a CPA that it wasn't all about the numbers. And in fact, even if you had great accounting systems, if you had weak people read culture, you got weak results. And almost the opposite. If you have awesome people, but weak processes, somehow or the other, the awesome people can perform better than the weak processes and you get great outcomes. So I think that's a realization we all go through. She then talked about Myers-Briggs. And Myers-Briggs is based on sort of Jungian philosophy about how our brains work. And we're all familiar with parts of it, right? We all think of introverts versus extroverts. Now, when you double click on it, there's more to it. So introverts or extroverts is not how you speak, it's how you think. So an introvert needs to get the information and reflect on it for a while before they can make a decision. Extroverts, they explore data by blurting out loud. They say things and they wait for the response back. And so it's a different process. Now, one would argue that our friend Elon that we talked about before is an extrovert. He blurts stuff out, waits for the feedback, and then makes adjustments. And for him, that's perfectly fine. That's how you learn and move forward. For the rest of us, we go, well, it looks like he's flip-flopping. His brain may not see it that way. He sees it as an extrovert. Now, where this becomes important, back to the chemistry of a meeting, is if you want to get great input from an introvert, you need to plant the seed and wait. So let's say you're doing an FP&A, you need input from all the department managers. Give them a warning shot. Give them a day or two where they've got the data, they've got the questions, and they can think about it. Now, when they show up, the outcome's much better. We did some research back at Harvard on this, and here's what we discovered. We've all been in those meetings where someone drops a spreadsheet on you. You're supposed to look at the numbers, listen to the conversation, and make insightful comments. When you do that, the recommendation has about a 30% viability rate. In other words, if we measure, is it a solid idea? Could it be implemented? And if it was implemented, would it give us great results? And the success rate is about 30%, 30%. If you give that same spreadsheet to the person 2 days ahead of time with what the conversation is going to be about, guidelines, in that meeting, the viability goes from 30% up to 70%, because people had a chance to think about it. They've worked with their teams. They've come up with recommendations. What comes out of their mouth is, in the 30% ratio is basically the first non-ludicrous idea that comes to their mind. Whereas given them a day, they can work on it and it becomes a 10th idea that ends up getting forwarded to the team.
Excellent examples. You got me thinking about Elon and Twitter again. More than anything, it was his tool to do what you just said, to blurt out and test the waters on ideas or approaches or commentary on the news headlines. It is that type of tool, isn't it? And that's what he fell in love with, and that's why he overpaid for it, because he thought, here is a tool unlike any other that complements me in how I do my work, perhaps. I don't know.
Could be. Well, and as a Canadian, looking down at American politics, I see the same thing, right? That instrument has been used by politicians down here in the same way. And we're now seeing that in politics up in Canada, where when the government has an idea, they float it out there on Twitter first, and they wait to see what the bounce back is. And if it's positive, they go forward. If it's not, they allow the thing to sort of fade into the static and go away. So what if we did the same thing in businesses? What if we allowed our people a chance to see the information and reflect on it before the meetings? So what's interesting about what Ambereen said is, and there's more to Myers-Briggs than just introvert, extrovert. I use that as an example that we all think about. There's another attribute about whether we're judgmental or not. So judgmental people, they collect a certain amount of data. They go, okay, I now know enough. I can make a decision. The opposite attribute is people that are always looking for more information. So they get right to the crux, right at the edge, 1 yard line of making a decision. Then they suddenly go, gosh, I need a whole bunch more data before I can go forward. So the trick here is to a large extent, if you understand the thought processes of people in the room, you can help the conversation move forward more effectively, and also call for people's participation at the appropriate moment, so that everyone gets included, but gets included in a way that's safe.
Let's make inclusion the segue to our next workplace champion, who is Anat Askenazi, CFO of Eli Lilly. Now, I should mention she gave a great overview as to, and I think she was ready for my question when I came to her. She built her entire career at Eli Lilly. She never left. And of course, my question was, what kept you there? Again, she's been there 21 years. So you can turn back the clock and say, you must have 8 years ago had the itch to move on. There must have been opportunities. There must have been executive search people calling you. And she just, boom, she said, number one, it's what we do. That's what gets me out of the bed in the morning. Number two, the organization bet on me time and again. There were opportunities that she feels she was given to prove in herself time and again. And number three, it's about the people around her who she works with. She's always said she's really appreciated the people. And I think the clip we're about to share will highlight that nicely. Again, this is Anat Askenazi, CFO of Eli Lilly.
I've never done this before, right? So the organization bet on me in at multiple stages of my career. Fortunately, it worked well every time, but I really enjoy that. And the view that we see employees as our core asset, and the investments we make in employees is quite significant from a career development perspective. So that's the second thing. The third, and today probably one of the more important factors for me, is who I work with. And I say this to newer employees, people coming out of college, or they just got their MBA. And we will, people who have career aspirations that they want to get to higher level positions in the organization. You'll be working hard. You may have long hours on occasion. And you want to know that you're walking into an office building, or if you're sitting at home and you're on a Zoom call, with people that truly, truly value you as a person. They care about you as a person and as a career professional, and they're willing to invest in you as a person. And that is so critical. That's the one thing I think that would take me out of an organization, is if I felt that I was in an environment that does not cultivate that and doesn't allow that to occur. But I think if you walk the halls of Lilly, that's one thing that you truly feel about this organization. I always say it's kind of an organization with a beating heart. It's a company where you have individuals, and I think there's a bias in selection as well, who truly care about each other. And it's not just in terms of investing in someone's career. It's just on the personal side, whether it's, I remember years ago, it's you go out and you pick someone's child from daycare because they're stuck somewhere, or you're helping a colleague who's dealing with other difficulties. But that means a lot, because we do spend a significant portion of our waking hours at work. And you want to know that you spend it with a group that you care about and they care about you as well. Is how do I ensure I have the right people in the right roles? So I talked about the matching, and I think that's really important. We bring excellent people into the company. How do you ensure they're actually in the roles where they can flourish the most? And identifying talent early, advancing them, giving them the skill set and the room to grow. Incredibly important. And now, post-pandemic, if we can say post-pandemic, I think what we have is a world where people can work remotely, so they can join a company in a different state and stay in their home here in Indiana. How do I ensure that they want to stay with Lilly? That is really important. High on my agenda is to ensure retention, and we retain people by ensuring that they feel that they come here every day, or if they're working from home, that they work on meaningful work and they have an organization that's going to support their career wherever that career needs to go. And that's going to give them challenges and opportunities that they see exciting, but will also allow them to disconnect and recharge. So, as an example, we're heading into the end of the year here, end of the year in December, holidays around the world. And we have in the US, we've instituted a shutdown. In December, we have a week where we close the facility and people go home and they rest and recover and recharge their batteries so they come fresh the following year. That's one of the messages I'm sending out to people. Make sure you leverage that. Use that opportunity to recharge, spend time with people you love, and come back excited for the next year, because we do have a massive agenda ahead of us we need to deliver.
What I thought was truly delightful about the overall theme was her perspective about how you need to be valued as an employee, whether you're in a Zoom call or in a meeting. To me, that was the overall theme. And I think it's an important reminder to us. In the previous clip, we talked about how we make sure that we take advantage of people's personalities to help them perform as their best version of self. But an attribute beyond personality is just valuing the person. We talk about a safe room, a room where you can allow your comments, your diversity to be on the table without it being controversial. And part of that is helping people feel valued. And there's two sides to the value coin. One is positive reinforcement for things that we want to see. So diversion and so diversity and so on, but also guardrails. So often we see behavior that is not acceptable and we turn a blind eye to it. And I think reacting to it is part of what I would see as her equation of showing value, that's actually showing value to the rest of the room, saying this is not the behavior that we want to see and not how we want to work together. And that's showing everyone else in the room is valued as well, not that people get to stand on the podium and do things that go against our values or culture. So that value, as I listened to her talk, was quite interesting.
I don't know if we can pick up the thread of Elon Musk again. Part of his mantra, as you know, is he's not a fan of the virtual model. He wants you in the office. And he's been driving home that point in lots of tweets. He likes to criticize many of the cultural sensibilities of today's work environment. And he's tweeted multiple times about what he refers to as the woke mind virus. And he's saying, this is nonsense. I'm an entrepreneur and I get to throw stuff out there as you described and see what sticks and experiment and bring it back. And you're stopping me from doing that. We have to have the elbow room and everybody in the room to really discover how to make this grow and innovate.
I think you've touched on two topics. I'll unpack them. I mean, the first one is your comment about, and you use the word woke, and I'm afraid I really don't. My brain doesn't get that very well. But the idea is, in business, over the years, we've seen many things become a trend, no different than, wide collars and bell bottoms. And they're trends that aren't necessarily based on facts and logic, but they become sort of dogma. And sometimes you have to step back and just take a look at them and say, does this make sense? So the example I always think of is, think of any room when you're having a meeting on whatever the topic is. There's some people in the room who are absolutely subject matter experts and other people not so much. And we give the people, often we make the mistake, I think, of giving the people with not so much experience and subject matter expertise an equal voice. So I'm going to take it out of the controversial business world. So imagine I'm around the table. Your podcast fans know I've got 5 boys. So we're at the kitchen table. I've got the 5 boys, myself, and my wife. And we're having a debate, pretend they're in high school. We're having a debate about, do we buy an Xbox or pay the mortgage? And we all have this conversation. On the conversation about, do we buy an Xbox or do we pay the mortgage, be equally weighted by my 5 high school children? Or should we take a look at the subject matter experts and I'll allow them to guide the conversation and ultimately make the decision? In that case, you go, gosh, it's obvious the parents should be taking a strong leadership role. And I can see it easily in my personal life, but we tend to forget that in the business life. So now we're in a room, we'll go back to my previous scenario, an FP&A meeting. The person running that department knows more. The accountants, the finance team knows more, but we've got a bunch of other people in the room who are voicing opinions who aren't part of that department and not part of the financial world. And somehow or the other, we give them equal weighting. Now, I'm just saying that's an example where the common business culture says that's what we should be doing. But if someone stood tall and said, hey, I think we need to understand where the power is for this part of the conversation, that would be much more useful to organizations. Is it politically safe? Can you do that these days? I don't know if that's part of woke or not, but that's where we get into sticky stuff, where we've got these business fads which take on a life of their own that may not be driving value for the business. But there's more. The second part of what you said was about being in the same place in the face-to-face meetings, and I have my own personal opinion and experience, but let's pretend that I'll try to exclude that. I mean, my personal bias, just so it's upfront, is I often say I lied to my clients for 2 years and said Zoom was just as good. Now I'm back in front of people. I realize I didn't at the time, but now realize I lied. The chemistry that happens face to face is magical compared to what's happening in Zoom. Now, it's like golf. You got to figure out when does a face to face, what topics require face to face to be more productive than not. And I don't think it's ever going to be back to where it was before, but I think we need to be careful as we consider the topic for any meeting. Back to the topic of this podcast is who should be in the room? What should we be forming the right personalities and to get the right chemistry? And what does that process look like? So stop thinking of meetings as accidental occurrences, but think of them as a piece of machinery where the right problems go in, the right process occurs, the right answers go out. And that's what we're talking about today. Some things work better face-to-face, some don't. But I think it's also a management style. So you might happen to have a leader that just works better face to face. So let's create that piece of machinery where they can be their best. Or maybe you've got a bad culture where I need to reaffirm the bonds between the players and I need to do that face to face. So generalities are always a problem, but understand that what we're talking about today is making that piece of machinery called a meeting effective. And whether it's face-to-face or not is one of the considerations that we should be taking.
Well, I'm done with Elon. I'm not going to bring him up again. So, and besides, I want to introduce you instead to Evan Goldstein, who is CFO of Seismic. It's worth mentioning here that Evan had spent 10 years at Genentech and 11 years at Salesforce. He graduates from Genentech to Salesforce, so he enters Salesforce in some rather senior roles in finance and corporate strategy, which, again, he has these great 2 chambers of learnings and past experience to reach into. Made it a sort of a standout episode for us. Here's Evan Goldstein, CFO of Seismic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's just start with the dynamics that are going on, because I feel like the last 3 years with the start of the pandemic have been really fascinating, from the Great Resignation to, the really decentralized workforce model that has empowered us to manage people differently. There's a lot of complexities around that. While those, you have to adjust to those things, I think there's a couple of core things that I look for in talent. I am definitely of the mindset of the best athlete when it comes to, finance and organization broadly, not just FP&A, but broadly. I'm a big believer in the best athlete. And part of being the best athlete is curiosity. It's the number one thing that I look for in an interview process, and it's a really hard thing to ferret out. It's not an easy, and I'm not always successful at it. But I encourage my team to think about that. I can teach someone how to use Excel. I can teach someone how to use PowerPoint. I can teach them how to communicate. But if they don't have the innate curiosity, which you cannot teach, you can't learn all those things. They're not going to have the drive to learn all of those things. And so, during the interview process, I always ensure to allocate a significant amount of time for them to ask me questions. And how do they ask me questions? What's their line of thinking? I'll tell a story. When I was hiring for a senior financial analyst in the long-range planning team, I was looking for a certain mold. This is a model-heavy organization, right? I wanted someone who was likely a former investment banker that has that modeling expertise with these beautiful, crisp models. And we interviewed an individual, and this person probably asked me the best questions I've ever been asked in an interview. It was just like her line of thinking and her thoughtfulness and how my answers drove the next ones, and it opened up another door for her, and how she asked all those questions. I was completely blown away, and I was like, okay, well, she might not be the right fit for this job, but we need to hire her. And so I kind of just said, I talked to my manager at the time. He was the deputy CFO. I'm like, hey, can you please interview this candidate? And I didn't tell him how my feedback on this individual. And I want to hear what he had to say. And so he goes to the interview. He's like, I don't care where we put her, but we are hiring this individual. You don't have people that have that sort of innate curiosity. I ended up hiring her for that long range role. But like I said, I sent her out for Excel training. We just armed her with the right tools. And once you put those like little nuggets out there, then they run. And that is really, and that person had an incredibly successful career with me. And then they've gone on to do great things at Salesforce after that. And so that's just one of the things that I look for really in talent. It's really that curiosity, and really thinking about the best athlete rather than, a very like, I want this profile. I think that's easier to do earlier in your career. I think as you get a little bit, obviously you're hiring more senior people, you want some experience, but I've had great success hiring people from consulting into FP&A roles, or banking into FP&A roles, or whatever it is. A wide range. Like that individual I was talking about came from audit. She was doing SOX auditing, right? Very different than long-range strategic planning. So.
It was Evan Goldstein of Seismic again. During our interview with Evan, he emphasized that he has a set of principles, one of which, or the third one, is family, and how important it is to him and how he lives his life. And he has a sense of family at work as well, if I interpret his thoughts correctly. He shared with us that he is someone who believes in celebrating birthdays in the workplace, celebrating engagements with his work colleagues. He has an annual holiday party where he brings his colleagues together with his family. So there's a real effort that he makes with the people that he works with to make them feel as part of a family. Anyway, I thought I'd add that here.
I thought he was the perfect segue to the last two thought leaders that we've listened to. And obviously, what really stuck out is his emphasis about curiosity, right? So he's fascinated with how people think. And, like many people have told us, you can train in skills like how to use Excel in his example. You can't train in, an innate curiosity or a different way of thinking. And we should probably have a session, Jack, on neuroscience, because it's fascinating to see how people's brains work and make sure that we give it the right stimulus and stuff so that it comes out as a happy ending. And Evan is Jedi Knight. He's a master of talking about how people think. And he also seems to not worry about sort of common protocols. So, we've moved to many businesses away from a distinct line between work and home. And so We don't invite co-workers into our houses. We might invite them to a restaurant, or it's what Starbucks calls the third place. It's not home, it's not work, it's a third place. Whereas he's going to the second place, going back to my home. And that's a different message to people. And we've talked about how people think, with the Myers-Briggs and PI and those other assessments. We've talked about helping people feel valued and understanding that aspect. And he brings that the third element in about respecting how people think, and in fact choosing people for their thought processes as opposed to how we often interview and test for technical skills. Edward de Bono spent his career looking at how our brains, in his case, are being creative, thinking outside the box, all those slangs that we use. Curiosity is another attribute of that. So curiosity is the art of not taking things for granted. And the lack of ego, so I can ask questions without feeling of being compromised. Now I'm going back to that safe room, right? How can I make that room safe so people can be curious in that room? What's that expression? And I'm going to get this wrong. We need to look it up, but it's something like, we should all learn to start being more curious and less judgmental, because we end up rushing to a judgment. But if we postpone that for as long as possible and ask as many more questions as possible, it's amazing what you can learn.
I'll point out it escaped my notice when we were trying to think about what these three voices had in common. And of course, you pointed out that it's really about bringing people together or having meetings or making them collaborative. What else? Is there something else? Or could you be more specific? What is it exactly?
I would say they're all conscious of our people events are not accidental. And we need to orchestrate them for the organization's benefit. And frankly, your benefit as a manager. If you can orchestrate those moments, you get way better outcomes.
And too often we think they're intended to happen organically.
Correct.
And in fact, you have to orchestrate, you have to help the connections be made.
Right. I had one consultant, he was a young buck, and he realized I was wearing one of these digital watches. And he would text me during the session if he noticed someone wasn't participating or if someone looked like they were disengaging. And so I'm up there at the front, and to begin with, it was quite a distraction because he would be peppering me all the time. Once we figured out what the rapport was and what the appropriate moments to comment were, it was awesome. Because when you're up in front, again, think of trying to orchestrate is the right word. This is an orchestra. I've got violins and cellos and drums, and I'm trying to make sure that they all work in harmony. They all come in at the right point. They all exit at the right point. Oh, that's a really good metaphor. I'm going to have to use that one in the future. But when you're up there, it's hard to be aware of all these things going on and be managing the meeting at the same time. And it was a fascinating sort of new tool in our tool case to have that observer in the room. In fact, we now use it as an on-ramp for new consultants. So, once you get past, making PowerPoints and carrying my bags and crap like that, the next level of your progression is you're the observer. And it teaches people to observe what's going on and be aware of the small body signals and eye movements and other activities that tell you chapters and chapters of information about what's happening inside that room. And it's back to the theme of this conversation. How do I create that environment that allows people to thrive and be successful based on their unique thinking skills and so forth?
And the short list for making that happen would be?
Creating a safe room, being cognizant of how other people think, so you give them the maximum opportunity to add value in that meeting. So if we loop back to the theme du jour, which is your friend Elon, you kind of have to say, okay, so in what world would that be the best intervention? So Sir Winston Churchill once said, there's nothing like a good war to unify a country. And it's possible that our friend Elon is creating a war. He's creating a bunch of energy, and he's basically saying either become part of this war or get out of the way. And I'm just imagining things here, but there is a world in which maybe what he's done is remarkably brilliant. Now, there's another world in what he's done has been, not so much, but I just wanted to share the other side of that coin.
Well, interesting. Some of the reporting has revealed that Musk and his team have sort of been convening meetings in a conference room where they summon the employees to come in and sort of build their case for staying or leaving. So it's kind of like his bunker is the image that comes to mind.
Yeah, I mean, and using that metaphor, he's in there doing hand-to-hand combat. He's not sitting up in some ivory tower ignoring it. I mean, so I have no idea. I have no knowledge about what was happening in the organization before. I have no idea about his management style. Our job here is just to provoke people's thinking who listen to this podcast and understand that there might be other parts to the story from which we can learn.
Okay, well, that's a nice place for us to wrap the episode, I believe. And I know that you have to travel, of course. And by the way, this is Canadian Thanksgiving was last month, right? It's October, isn't it?
It's even better than that because us smart Canadians take advantage of the US one as well. So we're really thankful because we get 2 Thanksgivings a year.
Well, we better just say safe travels, everybody. And, that's a lot of turkey. Brett Knowles and I will be back next month with yet another episode of Workplace Champions. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. And what the heck, go back for seconds on turkey. Eat like a double-dipping Canadian. Hi, it's Jack. If you haven't yet subscribed to Workplace Champions, you'll find us on Apple Podcasts. Or if you're an Android user, check us out on Spotify. If you like the show, please recommend it to a friend. Thanks for listening to Workplace Champions, a CFO Thought Leader production.